If I say the name Pachelbel, far more likely than not you will immediately think of Pachelbel's canon. There are two reasons why I've got a question mark on the wall. One is that I could not find a verified portrait of the guy. IMSLP says no composer photo available. And if you do a Google image search, the portrait that comes up a lot seems to be of a completely different Pachelbel. But more to the point, the question mark represents most people's reaction if you ask them to name any composition of Pachelbel other than the canon in D. It is so immensely popular that we usually don't stop to wonder what else the guy wrote. Of course, the canon's immense popularity has been the butt of a good many jokes. You may have seen Rob Paravonian's classic skit here on YouTube, where he calls Pachelbel the original one-hit wonder, and he laments how, as a cellist, he has the most boring bass line to play ever. It's just the same 8 notes over and over. There's also a wonderful BBC radio skit where Pachelbel is portrayed as this really grumpy guy who's annoyed that no one's interested in the rest of his music. All of this is, of course, a bit unfair because Pachelbel's canon really only took off as a popular phenomenon some 50-odd years ago with the advent of the Jean-François Paillard recording of it. In fact, Pachelbel was a pretty popular composer back in his day, but we don't have any indication that the canon was particularly popular of what he'd written. So, what kinds of music did this guy write? Well, speaking of the canon, it turns out that it was originally published as 2 pieces, a canon and a gigue, and we just about never hear the gigue. However, it's short enough that I'll just play you the whole thing, although in the interest of time, I'm going to skip the repeats. I've seen YouTube commenters refer to this piece as the B-side that no one plays. Although, I have to admit, between just the canon and the gigue, if I didn't know anything about popular opinion, I'd have to concede that the canon is probably the more compelling of the 2 pieces. But what else is there besides the canon and the gigue? Well, a couple months ago, I was starting to become interested in Pachelbel's other music when, quite by chance, I ran into another classical pianist at an open mic who happens to be a big fan of Pachelbel's music. Shout out to Sebastian, I'll put your channel below. He played at open mic a keyboard suite by Pachelbel, funnily enough also in the key of D major, and it was a great little collection of pieces. I'll just give you a sample. This is the first movement, the Allemande, again without the repeats. And you can really hear how Pachelbel influenced Bach. Keep in mind, Pachelbel was 30-something years older than Bach. And while we don't know whether the two ever met in person, we do know that Johann Sebastian's eldest brother, Johann Christoph, studied with Pachelbel for 3 years. And, of course, Johann Sebastian went to live with this brother after their father died, and his brother was his teacher for several years. So quite aside from being influenced by Pachelbel's compositions, Johann Sebastian was a grand pupil, so to speak, of Pachelbel. Speaking of Bach's influences, Pachelbel is best known in his day as an organist, and so I should highlight some of his work in that direction. Of his organ works that I've heard so far, this one is probably my favorite. It is an organ toccata in E minor. Actually, to give a better idea of the organ effect, I'm going to add a whole bunch of octave doublings. This is the sort of thing that Ferruccio Busoni did when he transcribed Bach's organ works for piano. Pachelbel also wrote quite a bit of liturgical choral music, but I've come up surprisingly dry trying to find the sheet music for most of this. So here I'll just have to leave you with a recording recommendation, which you can find here on YouTube as of the making of this video, Pachelbel's Vespers. And these are marvelous. I was looking around trying to find more info about the music. I found this blurb on prestomusic.com that says the music was reconstructed in part. And that would explain why I couldn't find the sheet music for this stuff freely online, because the manuscripts are probably a mess, and any recent attempts at cleaning them up for publication are probably still under copyright. I also found this review of the same recording at allmusic.com, which, in addition to having some extra context, has this juicy historical nugget. Most likely composed in Nuremberg for the Church of St. Erfurt during Pachelbel's last years, the manuscripts containing Pachelbel's Vespers settings were deposited for safekeeping in the Bodleian Library at Oxford by one of Pachelbel's sons, Charles Theodore Pachelbel, shortly before his departure for the American colonies around 1733. Let that sink in. Johann Pachelbel, composer of the Canon in D and all this other music, had a son who came to the American colonies 43 years before the Declaration of Independence. Well, I think we should let Pachelbel Jr. have his own video, so let's leave that as a thread to follow up on some other time. I hope you enjoyed this small sampling of Johann Pachelbel's other music. And by the way, I'm not trying to discourage anyone from enjoying the canon. I'm just saying, for these so-called one-hit wonder composers, whether you love their one hit or you hate it, give their other music a chance sometime. See you all in the next video. This is Ben, signing off.